The thesis statement of the show, or one of them, is power corrupts, and I think it's very interesting to look at that in this make believe world, but with the parallels being what they are.
Welcome back to Sunday Morning Juice. I am Elisa, and today I am joined by Matt Bowen and Chris Leonard, two Los Angeles based composers who have spent the better part of a decade quietly shaping the sound of one of television's most unhinged universes. As co-composers on Amazon's The Boys, it's spin-off Gen V and Vought Rising, scoring superhero chaos with homemade textures, raw live instruments, and a philosophy that sometimes the wrong note is exactly the right note. Matt and Chris, welcome to Sunday Morning Juice.
Thank you. I love that intro.
I
Sometimes the
know.
wrong note is the right note. I feel like I should put that in our bio or something.
If 22-year-old Matt and Chris heard the Vought Rising or even The Boys score, would they recognize themselves in the composition?
Ooh,
What a
it's a
great question.
boss question.
I don't think I would.
I don't think I would. It's hard to not be too self-complimentary here, but I think I would be a little bit jealous of how much fun that composer is having, and be just um yeah.
I think it's also safe to say that one of the reasons I probably wouldn't recognize it is that I don't know that at 20 or 2 years old, either one of us would have had the faintest clue that they could make a TV show this crazy that would need that music. Like when I look back at 22, there was no streaming, there was no internet. But like that's insanity. And to think about the kinds of like insane stuff that brought this music forth, whether it be exploding penises or giant lasering of whole like ice capade shows, like none of that would even possibly be in the realm of possibility however many years ago. So I think you would hear that music and be like, well, what kind of crazy show would this be for? And now that it
Yeah.
exists, it makes more sense.
Honestly, you say to 22-year-old Matt. I mean, I feel like the Matt that existed right before the show happened wouldn't believe the score, just because I feel like we've learned and just as importantly unlearned so many things in creating the score. And when I say by unlearned, is I feel like leading up to this, working on the show, everything is about making it bigger or prettier or more grandiose
More
or
shiny and professional.
shiny, more complex. Complexity is a good thing. Layers are a good thing. Um, and when we got to the show, there was a lot of unlearning of that. And so, yeah, 22-year-old Matt would not, but I would even say 8 years ago, Matt, we're not going to say what age that is. Um, it's not
Oh,
22-year-old. It's not 22-year-old Matt.
Is there a particular instrument or a sound from The Boys listeners would never guess is in there?
I, I mean, I kind of hope a lot of them, just because there's a lot of the kitchen sink and a lot of them processing through guitar pedals and stuff, so to help, not even to help disguise it. We don't care about disguising it, but we do care about roughing it up and putting it in our world. This is a super random specific one, but there's a dish rack holder, like a metal dish rack holder, that we're scraping with
all kinds
probably
of
a knife, yeah, all kinds of
clips.
things. But we're sending it through guitar pedals, and it rolls off a lot of that shiny, high end, the sparkly stuff, and it makes it a little, a lot grittier. And that sound happened every now and then whenever, Butcher might have this kind of like standoff moment. And so it reads as like, in those Westerns, they've got those castanets, like, and it worked so well because it felt kind of from the garage, and resourceful like our boys.
Well, the other one to mention too is Frenchie, because a lot of times whenever Frenchie and Kamiko are really having a tender moment, you will hear, if you listen, it's a French musette, so it's a French accordion that's way in the background, but it's got so much
Mhm.
processing and echo and repeats and this thing, so it becomes this wash, this like accordion wash that sits in the back of the score. But to us, every time I hear it, I'm like, it makes me fall in love with Frenchie even more. So, yeah, I think the two of them and their relationship is special, and the fact that we got to bring a little bit of Paris into that part of the score too was really fun.
You've been composing for these characters since 2019, and now you're using the music to usher them into the end. What has been the most challenging part about that for you both?
The most challenging honestly for season five was how much do we reference ourselves, because I feel like seasons one through four it have been all about pushing and creating and going further and different and evolving. And when you get to season five, it's at some point you owe it to the audience to reference, and sometimes heavily reference, something that has previously existed. And I think there was a surprisingly it was surprisingly emotional experience for me. I'm sure Chris too. Um, to reference those, especially as we get to I'd say these last three episodes is when it was like, oh my gosh, and we're referencing something that, this random spark of an idea from 2019, but it has all these added layers and meaning to it now.
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with leading up to, and then saying goodbye to so many of these characters, sometimes in a very, very terrible and horrific way. But characters that we've developed relationships with as much as anybody in the audience. We've developed these great relationships, both storytelling wise and in sometimes real life with the actors. So to be able to like go through and realize that, like, okay, this whole cue leads up to when so and so dies. When A Train died, that was a huge moment. When Firecracker died, it was a huge moment. So all these things where we've been building up, and then we have to musically sometimes comment using some of, as Matt said, their thematic material and kernels of their motives, to then come back and be like, oh, they're done. Like, this is all over, and that part of our lives and the audience's lives is over. And to be able to like bring that back, it did become surprisingly emotional. And I think that's probably the biggest difference with what we did in season five, is that there's every bit as much like violence and shock as always, but there's a lot of emotion in this season that I don't know that either one of us were really prepared for.
No, no, and just to add one more thing onto that is, when you say like what was the hardest thing, and I'd feel like, you might say like, oh, what was this weird new approach or weird new instrument? And it's like, well, we've been weird and edgy and dark all along, and so in a strange way, it was us embracing, in sometimes, not always, a much more traditional approach to scoring, and leaning heavier on the orchestra than we ever have. And that wasn't something we set out to do,
Just
but
needed.
it was what the picture called for, is what the season and the arc and the stories called for.
Is there a scene where you guys knew while writing it that the music was just going to hit different, and then were you right about it when you watched it back?
Should we talk about the sort of leading up to the big climax? I think we can.
Yes, I mean,
Um,
absolutely.
so often in these shows, they put temp music in while they're cutting the episode. So while they're editing, they'll put pieces of score in. They had put a piece of our score in this giant no, it's actually longer. It's like 8 or 9
Yeah,
minute long sequence as
yeah.
our heroes are finally sort of heading towards the ultimate showdown with Homelander. There were all these pieces of music from the boys from previous seasons, and it all fit. But I remember watching it when we sat down and spotted it with Kripke, and I said, I feel like this is more cinematic than we've ever been, and I feel like this needs to be one giant piece of building thematic music, and it needs to be grand and orchestral and sort of show us leading all the way up. So he's like, I think I might know what you mean, but don't really know. And so we basically wrote this almost symphonic building piece of music that's 9 minutes long that gets us all the way to the showdown between our heroes and Homelander, and and it also ties up a couple of big loose ends along the way in terms of story arcs of multiple characters, all as part of this one big piece of music, and it's very not what the boys normally does. It's very much like what you would see, I think, in much more of a big epic, theatrical cinema experience. So I was really excited that we played it for him, and then Eric was like, "Oh, well, yeah, that's great. That works perfectly." So it was a good swing. We nailed that one. So I think, and that's in episode 8. So we'll see if the
Yeah.
world agrees with it. But I felt like it deserved it. It was the big finale.
Yeah, what Chris is describing is, of course, not unheard of in shows or movies or whatever, but in the world of the boys, it's definitely something we have never done. Just because there's a sensibility to being understated, typically speaking. Because the writing's so good and the acting's so good, and it's just like when in doubt, we try to go understated. But on this one, in a weird way, if we hadn't done it, it might have felt a little more disjointed, and it kind of helped like plant a flag in the episode. I mean, really, the edit itself was very symphonic. Chris is being humble with the royal we, but I was lost in the weeds on. I mean, there was like 8 different cues being temped, and I was like, oh yeah, well each these, and Chris is like, no, 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 this is the start, this is the finish, this is
That's
one
one.
cue, and it just like made so much sense. And yeah, we are talking before the world has seen it, so I hope they respond well to it. But I'm very proud of where it ended up.
This sounds like such an existential experience. I feel like I'm in the world, in the universe.
It was a surprisingly difficult, creatively, emotionally, headspace wise experience to work on the finale. By the time you get to seasons 4 or 5, we know exactly how to deal with scenario X because we've seen those scenarios before, and so now we're going to put this new twist on it, but we know exactly how to deal with it. And this being the finale, at least speaking for myself, I did not know exactly how to deal with some of these scenes, and they took a lot more digging and introspection working on it.
Okay, so have y'all ever written a cue where the music tells a story and then the scene tells a different story? And if so, who won?
There's a lot of tongue in cheek, like, oh man, which of the,
I mean, I think, if we want to use some of the songs as examples, like
yeah.
so much of what we've done song wise in the boys has been, very satirical, and it's almost always meant to play against what is happening. So something like last year where we did Let's Put the Christ in Christmas, and it's a happy spirit of Christmas song while people are ice skating. And the entire time this is happening, as they're rehearsing this ice skating show, Homelander's chasing Huey all throughout this building and this arena. And then at the very, before the song even ends, he literally lasers and massacres all of the ice skaters, and they just bleed out all over this huge ice rink. Which is insane. And then we've done these kids song, see something, say something, which was last year, which is meant for this
Yeah.
broad kids thing, and it's all about groomers and all of this like woke stuff, and meanwhile, like, it's Homelander's son who literally can kill everybody, and then immediately it cuts out of this like happy song that could be, in the Muppets or in Sesame Street, and then cuts to something else. And I think, this is probably a great example. Is this year, tomorrow is the seventh episode
Mm.
comes out. This will air after that, but so everyone will have seen it. But we got to do a song with David Diggs from Hamilton, who plays Old Father, and I co-wrote it with David, and the entire song is announcing Homelander as God. And that one's especially special to all of us because we had the very fortunate misfortune of writing it a year and a half ago before the election, and now we have an insane president who has decided that he thinks he's God. And so there's literally a giant golden statue right behind David's character of Homelander, and he's singing "Raise Him Up," now he's bigger than Jesus is like literally the words of the song. And my favorite line, one of my favorite lines of the song is, "We need a God who's strong and just and American like us." And so it's like this whole silly satirical thing. And then I'm like, oh my God, that's kind of what people are saying in real life now. And it's way too close.
Yeah, the song is smoking, and that kind of that helps with the satire, at least,
Yeah, it helps sell the other, Mr. X.
which we thought was, or Chris, thought was going to be edgy at the time, and now it's on the
Now
nose.
it's a
But
little too silly.
now it plays with like the South Park.
So, after spending all of this time inside of the boys' universe, how does real world news affect you?
Oh,
Well,
it's sad.
yeah, it's a little sad sometimes because I'm like, oh, this was supposed to be fake, and now it's kind of true. But what I will say is it very much feels, at least for me, I feel like the reason that Vought as a premise of a company that controls everything and has its hand in superheroes and every form of media and the government, and it's now installed Ashley as the vice president, and it basically is having Homelander puppet the president of the United States around. And it's like, oh yeah, the reason that this is such a big hit and such a big success is because in reality that is all very possible, and it is 100% probable that much of this is already happening, except maybe the laser eyes part. But most of the other stuff is probably very possible.
Yeah, what you're hoping is kind of edgy satire when it becomes reality is not satisfying.
Yeah.
The thesis statement of the show, or one of them, is, power corrupts. And I think it's very interesting to look at that in this make-believe world. But with the parallels being what they are, it's not cool.
Chris, what did Matt teach you about yourself as a composer?
Ooh.
Ooh, I think he taught me that I perhaps overwrite, and he taught me about efficiency of
Hmm.
finding a really great sound and featuring it. I think because I came from a more orchestral background and a more, composition degree kind of background, and Matt comes from a more record producer, record musician background. I was so used to having a 100-piece orchestra and making sure that I needed the flutes to have something to play that was complementary to the French horns, that was complementary to the contrabassoon and all this stuff. And I feel like I really learned quickly on this show and watching Matt that, like, if you just have a really cool out of tune, ukulele cello that you hit with a super ball and put that right in the middle of the mix, that's really a couple things to support it, and that's all you need. And if you put too much around it, you blur the picture, you blur the visual. You need to focus on things that are really interesting, and that's something that I've really feel like I've used not only in the boys, but I've tried to bring that into my writing overall.
So it's funny. I would actually say the same thing, but in that I feel like Chris does a very good job of writing a strong motif and uh, then not blurring those lines and being like, no, no, that's the motif, and it's so powerful and effective. Stepping out of the creative realm and just into, what we do is, I feel like Chris, and all of, Chris is much further along in his career. And for all the success he's had, he absolutely never forgets that we are creating. We have so many deadlines to hit, and we have all these spreadsheets that keep track of our cues, and it can be easy for it to fall into like, oh, how much work do we have to do? And what I'm always impressed with Chris is, like, he never forgets that, like, hey, we're making movies, we're making TV shows, and that should be fun and it should be creative. And the minute that it starts to feel like work, you're probably going to be putting out something that feels pretty average.
I know that you both aren't in the same space very often when you're collaborating. What's a tip you'd give to others that are building creative trust with those that they don't really share a room with?
I think, like any relationship, it's just time. I mean, I first started working for Chris in 2009. So, there's just a familiarity and a trust. I mean, it feels amazing in a relationship standpoint, that I feel like I can send Chris any idea, and be like, oh, I was thinking about this, and I have no worries with him saying like, oh yeah, that's never gonna fly. I'm like, okay, that's what I thought, but I'm glad that we checked in,
Yeah.
to have that, like, that the experience and those ears to say like, oh yeah, that we should pursue that. And I'd like to think it goes the other way, where Chris sent me that that idea for that 8-minute cue, and was like, is this anything? And I was like, "Fuck, yes it is. Like, this is actually this makes so much sense now. This whole sequence makes sense because of this idea." So
Well, I
it's
think the
really
other thing,
it's a
yeah,
luxury.
yeah, I think the other thing too that I both with Matt and with Kripke, and even Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, I've had these experiences, and I feel like I learn the most about all of my collaborators when we're not actually working, or not directly working. So, like, I was in London doing Sausage Party with Seth Rogen way before The Boys ever came up, and I learned so much just producing. Alan Menken wrote the song that opens up Sausage Party, and I was sort of producing and orchestrating, and then I got to conduct this session and to watch Seth react to that had nothing to do with music I had written. I started to see things that he liked and he didn't like, and how he played comedy and how he played, made musical references to political humor and satire. And then, I went to college with Kripke, and we ended up doing, all these short films together, and we would literally, all of our friends, the editor, the DP, everyone from USC Film School, we all would get in this like van. We'd rent a van and drive from LA to Park City, Utah, to go to Sundance, and we'd literally, like, 9 of us would sleep in a 2-bedroom apartment on couches on the floor and just try to sneak into parties all week. And so I learned a lot about what Eric would say about other people's movies on Main Street in Park City, and just hearing Eric comment about someone else's music let me learn a lot about him. And then when we first started working on The Boys, before we wrote a note of music, Matt and I and my former assistant Dara, we all went shopping, and we literally went for like days to different like junkyards and electronic stores and music stores, and just started hitting stuff and turning on broken amplifiers and all this stuff. And we weren't like trying to think of the theme or anything like that. So even just watching, like, what you go into a store, like, what do people pick up? What when they make a noise when they hit this pipe, that we're in some, like, literally a plumbing store, and like Matt's like tapping on a, like the head of a toilet, and it was like, oh, you know what, that's got a cool ring to it. I'm like, oh, okay. And you kind of start developing this creative relationship. And interpretation of people's tastes and style and likes and dislikes without actually sitting by a keyboard or in a studio. And I think that's the thing that is, when Matt talks about like fun, that's the fun part, and that's where I feel like I learn the most about anyone I'm going to collaborate, whether it's another composer like Matt or whether it's directors and producers like Kripke and Seth and that whole crew. It just learning in a non-studio environment and then bringing all of that knowledge and trust and understanding into the studio, I think allows you to have more fun and end up making cooler shit, quite honestly.
And if someone brand new to the music composition world came to you guys and said, I'm so inspired by your career, I want one similar to yours, what's the first thing you'd tell them that nobody told you guys?
When I first got to USC, everyone talked about music. It was always like, here's what the oboe can do, and here's the range of a French horn, and this is what John Williams did when he did Star Wars or whatever. Learned later that what's much more important was that story comes first, absolutely, and collaborating with the person who either came up with the story or whose job it is to shepherd and tell this story. In the case of the boys, it's Kripke, but like whether it's a director or a producer or a writer, like find them. Like I was so lucky to find Eric Kripke when I was a sophomore in college. We weren't even 21 yet. And he was from Toledo and I was from Pennsylvania, and we were like just these two dorks at USC, like sharing a beer and talking about, why they loved ET, and, and find that person. Like you can figure out the orchestration rules later and figure out like all that stuff. But like, if you don't have someone to collaborate and tell stories with that you share a love of a certain type of story or movie or characters, then you're not going to have anything to write music for. So that would be my big hint, was like, go to every film festival, every film school, every seminar, masterclass, whatever, about storytelling and movie making. Like you can go to the ones where it's like, oh, how to write music for movies. But the one that you really should go to is the one that's how to make movies, where everyone else in the seats are not composers, where they're editors and camera people and producers and writers and directors, because those are the people you're going to get to tell stories with.
That sparked an answer on my side, which is a similar seed, and then to take it in a different direction, is it's because it hit on my biggest insecurity for sure when I was getting going, which was, as Chris mentioned, I came up on the record side of things, so I didn't have the schooling. I didn't go to, composer. I didn't get undergrad even. I was very worried about the holes in my music theory background and stuff. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but what does matter, what's king creatively, is see a very creative, original idea, and it can be a very complex, beautifully written symphonic piece. And on The Boys, honestly, if you did a piano reduction of some of our, like, at least our heist cues, it'd like literally be, it wouldn't even be a chord, it'd be like one note. But how do we keep that evolving in an arrangement? um, and that the creative ideas can manifest in any way, shape, and form. So I now know my music theory. I took my orchestration classes and filled in the gaps, and it's almost like I do kind of wish like sometimes I wish I could go back to not knowing.
Matt and Chris, thank you both so much for speaking with me today and letting me in on the creative process. It was so nice to hear how passionate you guys are about it, and you guys are a part of the show, but you're also such fans of the show.
Thank you for having us, Elise.
Oh yeah,
Appreciate it.
thanks.
Really great questions. You hit us that even the
Yeah,
first one was like, ooh, this is going to be a good one.
yeah.
Thank
Well, great to meet and great to hang.
you.
Can't wait to hear what you think of the last episode.